Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Katherine Brodsky, who is a writer and a journalist and the author of No Apologies, which is her exploration of the boundaries around free speech. In this conversation, we talk about her political leanings and how tough it is to be a centrist nowadays, with so many people being pulled and pulling each other to the extremes of any given political perspective or spectrum. You can find Katherine's book in the links below, and also her Twitter, where she's busy writing and talking up a storm about the prescient issues of the day. Without further ado, here is Katherine Brodsky. There is kind of a skeptical atheist to anti-woke pipeline that's been well-traveled the last few years. Yeah.
Yeah, people either ended up becoming like more skeptical or not more skeptical. People either ended up, well, kind of in a way, they became skeptical of the woke side of things, or they became more entrenched in the woke ideology. So it's from what I understand in that community, it's sort of divided now.
Yeah. Well, you never identified as a skeptical atheist.
I'm a skeptic about everything, I think. So I'm a skeptic about everything in life, but I wouldn't have said that I identify as a skeptic in terms of like being part of any kind of skeptic movement. I'm also not, because I think the skeptic movement is more anti-religion, and I would say, they're more of an atheist movement, right? Whereas I'm more of a, I don't know. I'm an agnostic, but I also support other people's right to their beliefs more, like in terms of religion. So I don't really have, I want to support people in thinking what they want to think rather than, criticizing them for it.
Okay.
As long as they're not using the religion to do harmful things.
Like dig tunnels?
Like dig tunnels. Well, I mean, depends on where the tunnels go. I don't know which there's so many tunnels in the news today that I don't even know which tunnel to start with.
Really? Yeah, what's going on with all these tunnels in the world?
All these tunnels in the world. Well,
are people trying to get away or trying to escape or trying to import things? Like what is it about tunnels that is so alluring in 2024? Yeah.
Well, one of the tunnels is, one of the tunnels I think has more to do with trying to get places. If you're talking about the tunnel in Brooklyn, I think that had more to do with like getting to a place you're not supposed to. The tunnels in Gaza have to do with also getting to places you're not supposed to, because some of them were dug to get into Israel, but also hiding tunnels to keep people safe who are causing bad things in the world.
Are there ever any like righteous tunnels as far as you are concerned?
Tunnels. Sure. If there was a tunnel that was dug to keep people safe, I think that's a righteous tunnel.
Okay. Yeah.
I would support that tunnel.
Okay. Do you have any tunnels?
I can't tell you.
Okay. Yeah, that was a bad question. Let me just strike that off the record. Not asking that. Yeah.
Or there. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
No tunnels.
But
or maybe there's.
Have you been in tunnels, and are they good for writing books? Like, does it facilitate your writing craft to be in a tunnel?
I've been in safes. I've been in a safe for writing.
Like not a safe room, but like a place where there's lock boxes.
It's physically. So I used to work at this ad agency, and they had this room that was like a safe with a huge thing that locks from the outside, which I was a bit paranoid about, I'll be honest. Because imagine being stuck there. So I couldn't really write there for too long, but I had spent time in that safe. There was a bunker also in the same ad agency where we'd have our like creative meetings. And then
were you guys related? I guess this is another question I can't ask. Were you guys related to a 3-letter agency or something? Is this what's going on here?
Yeah, you can't ask me that.
Okay, but I can't even ask that.
But it's weird. Like lately, everyone thinks I'm part of some 3-letter agency. It's like, I get accused of like I've been accused of spying for like three different three-letter agencies by now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like, you're an asset or a
No,
what's the other
they
thing?
literally think I'm employed by them.
Okay.
Those were the accusations. Yeah.
How
Not
can
even
you
an
ever,
asset.
you could never possibly disprove that.
Well,
That's the
exactly.
perfect have you stopped beating your wife kind of question.
Yeah, but there's a lot of questions like that, aren't there? Because a lot of times people will make an accusation and they're like, "Yeah, prove me wrong," and I'm like, "How?" And by the way, any evidence I present to certain people really doesn't do much in terms of dispelling any kinds of narratives. So I think
Hmm.
they don't are not so interested in knowing the truth of things.
Narratives are a sticky thing.
They are sticky and then they stick. And once somebody sticks one to you, it really sticks, doesn't it?
Yeah. Do you have like a favorite narrative that you enshroud yourself with or that you promote, like you try
I
to
mean,
exude or like
obviously,
fulfill?
I mean, there is a narrative that I've been promoting, which is, speaking, having more tolerance, speaking to people who disagree with you more. So that's definitely a narrative that I've been promoting. I mean, I wrote a book called No Apologies that's really about that narrative about how important it is to use your own voice and how dangerous it is to have people silence you in a society and the harm that it does, whether it's in academia, art, science, and just generally your friendships are dishonest if you are not able to speak the truth of what you believe. So that's been my narrative. I also have been promoting this narrative of it's really important for us to hear things that we might disagree with when they come in good faith, because then it challenges your own ideas and either you improve, you understand better why you believe what you believe and have stronger arguments for it, or you might change your mind a little bit because maybe you're not exactly as right as you thought you were.
Yeah. You've been doing a lot of Twitter spaces or X spaces. I don't like the
Yeah,
word
X.
X.
If Elon hears you say Twitter, he takes 5 karma points out of your
Oh,
account.
karma. Oh, really? From my
Yeah,
account. I don't know
yeah.
where that karma that is. I wonder how
I
many
know.
I
That's because
have.
you haven't
Yeah.
collected any karma yet.
No, I still haven't even gotten to that level of Twittering yet. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, it's the higher Twitter level. That's correct. That's a
Is this a pay to win kind of thing, or you just have to work
yeah,
really
yeah,
hard? Okay.
definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
What have your spaces been about? And spaces are just kind of audio chat rooms that are
Yes.
hosted on that platform.
I've been doing, I used to do a lot more, especially in the Clubhouse days. I don't know if you're familiar with that app.
Yeah,
It's
I remember
also,
that.
yeah, it was a good audio app. That's where I kind of learned how to talk to people, but, or practice rather. I don't know if I've learned.
Like, do you mean just to speak your mind to people, to listen and speak your mind, or to facilitate
All of the
conversations?
above, because I did a lot of, I don't know what they were called. They weren't called spaces, but whatever they were called,
Rooms or
rooms. I was
whatever.
doing a
Yeah.
lot of rooms and different topics, and I bring
Okay.
special guests in, and I talked a lot about journalism and the state of journalism and things like that, and freedom of
Yeah.
speech. So it is where I sort of honed my chops, I guess. And then Twitter Spaces, I do talk a lot. I mean, it was a good way to meet people that I probably would never have been in the same orbit with. But in terms of my own spaces, like I find them so time consuming.
Yes.
People want me to do more spaces, but I don't do as many as I wish I could. But I've been doing them on different topics. Like I think there was one recently that was about Kevin Spacey, but it was more about the idea of like because he was acquitted of his accusations. So there was like three trials, one in New York that he won, one in I forgot Connecticut, I think, and that one the person who filed the complaint had mysterious suddenly decided not to speak, so they dropped the charges. And then not to testify against him. And then the third trial, which was in London, he had ended up winning, not with a full consensus, though. anyways, what was interesting to me in that case is that how do we deal with somebody who is, um, innocent, found innocent in the court of law, but in the public court of opinion, he still comes across quite guilty. A lot of people still believe he's guilty and treat him as such. So how do we as a society deal with that when on the one hand we should have, he went through due process and he won, so should have been acquitted in all courts. But at the same time, we also know that there's many reasons why people win, sometimes on technicalities or lose, sometimes on technicalities, sometimes because sometimes it doesn't go to court because there's just not the right kind of evidence or too much time has passed and the statute of limitation has passed. So there's many reasons as to why sometimes the courts fail. But at the same time, so do we hold, we have a very high burden of proof to convict someone in, legal court, as we should. But in the court of public opinion, should we have the same burden of proof? So I thought it was an interesting topic and it was quite an interesting discussion. But it's also something, yeah. Oh, I was going to say it's something, something that was in my book too, because I've had changed my views on some of the stuff myself because of the person that I interviewed who was specifically someone who was convicted in the court of opinion because of he was named, his name is Stephen Elliott, and he was named as on this list that went around called the shitty media man list. Are you familiar with that?
This is from a few years ago. Was this the one that was released as a Google Doc?
Yes. And it was like a few years ago during the Me Too movement.
Yeah. At the height of that Me Too thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember, had I not heard him tell his own story originally, I don't know if I would have had the same point of view on him. But hearing it, it really made me think about, how we treat people, especially in his case, it was an anonymous accusation. So sort of the fundamental idea of guilty until not guilty, like, do we get the guilty people and let some innocent people go? Or sorry, and get some innocent people in the process? Or do we let some guilty people go so that we can prevent the innocent from going under? So I think that's a very fundamental question. And it's, I think seeing what sort of happened to him and understanding that anonymous accusation shifted my view more towards it's sometimes better to let some guilty people go, but protect the innocent.
Well, what is the worth of public opinion? Like, what's its value? And what's its power? And what power should it have? And who gets to decide this thing called public opinion? When I was embroiled in a controversy about a stupid blue dress that a man wore at a conference, and a bunch of people had a very strong opinion that he shouldn't have done that because apparently it's fetish gear in their eyes, and they weren't even there. They had no interaction with them, but they wanted to exert their power on a conference that they had no relation to, and they were very strongly opinionated about that. So, and when I engaged with them to ask, well, to what degree do we want to start to police dress? And how are we going to codify that? How are you going to enforce that? One thing that became apparent in arguing with the people who were in charge or designated themselves as those who were in charge of public opinion was that they constantly spoke as though they spoke for everyone. They would speak for women specifically when they weren't voted on by women. They were speaking for themselves and some other women and some other men, but they would appeal to this this authority that they had. And, there's an appeal to an authority, right, which is a fallacy, but it's an appeal to an anonymous authority. Like they claim, and this is what happens over and over again in every single, I think across the board in any given democratic politic, or especially in activist circles, where the activists claim to represent this group of people that are then, they're kind of bundled up into like this group of people are defined by the opinion that the activist has. And you see that with the discourse around Hannah B. Jones, the woman who was in charge of the 1619 Project, she eventually explained that there's the political black. You could be black, you can be racially black, but that doesn't mean you're politically black. There's this political blackness, which is what is mean, and leftists are always kind of swapping out, or activists are always kind of swapping out language like that, so the Mott and Bailey kind of thing. So I'm asking, who tells who to take whatever this public opinion thing is seriously?
Oh yeah, I mean, in
regulate
terms
that?
of seriously, I think the public does what the public does. I think it operates often like a mob, where it's sort of there's an infectious idea that sneaks through the mob. So whatever, a few people with loud voices happen to say, in a way that's somewhat effective because people hear it, then people start sort of leaning in those directions a lot of the times, and that becomes, I think, like a consensus culture aspect to it. But what role does it have? I mean, I think it has a massive role because for various reasons. I think one, we're very tribal animals. So I think people care. Probably losing their tribe is one of the most important things for a lot of people, or having a tribe and having the tribe not judge them, not attack them. I mean, people are afraid of things like public speaking for a reason, right? Because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be shamed,
Yeah.
putting yourself out there. So it's very important to people. And then when you have a professional role, the public can decide to take away things from you. They can demand your head on a silver platter and you lose your job. But in a case of somebody like, say, Kevin Spacey, if the public embraces him, then he gets to be, a movie star. And if the public hates him and shames him and believes that he is guilty, even though he was technically acquitted, then he doesn't have the opportunity to be a movie star. And it was interesting because the last time I saw him was on Tucker Carlson's, whatever X show, and he was somewhat in character in it. And the comments, obviously most of the people who watch Tucker are going to be conservatives who seem to have been against cancel culture, but the comments were in their heads. You could tell they thought he was absolutely guilty. And we're actually quite upset with Tucker for having him on his show. And I thought that was interesting. And again, and that's what made me think about it. It's like, okay, on the one hand, you've got a guy who's gone through 3 trials, right? So, and even in my head, I'm going to admit, I mean, there was an assumption of guilt. I don't think he's probably not the nicest person to be around, but you can't just convict people based on thinking that maybe they're a little inappropriate. Do you take people's careers away?
Or predatory.
Predatory, right? But there's criminal predatory, and there is like, oh, I feel kind of icky around this guy. Which, look, if somebody gave me the heebie-jeebies, as they say, would I want to hire that person to be around others? No, I probably wouldn't want that. But this level of punishment where someone has been accused of a terrible crime and then really had an opportunity to go through the court system. And despite that, again, the public still thinks he's not worthy of any kind of grace or any kind of return. So I don't know. To me, it's an interesting dynamic to look at.
Well, I mean, yeah, but we all know that the court system isn't strictly fair. I mean,
Exactly,
O.J. Simpson, and there's a number of different very high-profile cases where there's a lot of guilt there, but there's no technical way to prove it, or the way that the technicalities fall out.
Well, and that's why I said, like, sometimes people get away with things specifically on technicalities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can kind of tell that they're guilty, but and yet.
Well, here's kind of one of the issues for me. We have to exert pressure on our elite And everybody has the opportunity and the responsibility and the so-called right to voice their opinion, to put pressure on everybody else in order to conform to some norm. And who sets that norm, how rigid or how loose that norm is one of the things that I'm interested in. And I can see that if we want to get slime balls or less slime bally activity in our elite system, which would be media, journalism, politics, business, then the court of public opinion is one way to exert pressure on those systems and stuff like that. And Kevin Spacey is playing a very deft game there. If anybody has watched that clip, it's like a 5 or 7 minute little joke interview where they go through it and it unravels within itself. It's very postmodern. It's very self-referential about it being self-referential, and he's deconstructing it. The character that Kevin Spacey is playing is that Frank Underwood from that show, that Netflix, House of Cards, who is an evil person. He is an evil person, and it's ironic, or it's actually poking fun at the audience that this evil, we delight in watching evil, or it's very popular, and it has been for a while, since I think the Sopranos are one really big push towards the anti-hero. It's very popular to be sympathetic to the psychopath, and Frank was being a psychopath. And to what degree is Kevin a psychopath, and to what degree do we delight in Kevin being a psychopath, or allow him to be a psychopath because he does it so deliciously for our own benefit, and he kind of brings poetry to that thing, so that there's this erosion of that fourth wall, but also it's asking us, or the questions being opened up to what degree do we want to aspire to virtue, and to what degree do we want to hold people to a virtuous standard. And again, how do we do that? How rigid, how loose that is. That is the discourse. But the problem with the mob mentality, as you brought up or indicated, is that it's not really reasoned. It's the opposite of reasoned. It's reactioned. And so it can't be sustained, and it can't be codified, and it can't be trusted, because it will go wherever the emotions lead it. So
It's the loss of reason. And it's very interesting because a lot of people that I talked to when I was researching the book, and just in general, would say that it is that a lot of times when people participated in mobs, they didn't actually remember that after. So there's this feeling that swoops in, and it's very interesting to me that could happen in something that's a social media, mob, as opposed to a physical mob. I can kind of, in a way, I can understand it better as a physical mob, because you've seen to what extent they become irrational, and to what extent they sort of become wild and lose all reason. But you would think that in a social media landscape, the same thing wouldn't necessarily be true, because why should it be so emotional? Why should you be so overtaken, right? It's not visceral, but yet it seems to act the same way. And it was a bit surprising to learn that. A lot of times people just really didn't remember being part of it, didn't remember it at all. I mean, they could be lying, but it just happens so consistently that maybe they're not.
Well, it's a loss of conscience and consciousness. I think they're probably tied together. When I was building the Evergreen documentary and going through hours and hours of footage of this protest, transcribing it all, going over and over and figuring out how to cut it and figuring out how to make it make sense to an audience as a narrative, I watch and expose over and over again these human beings acting like raving lunatics, and being, going from being dangerous to cringy and just out of their minds, and not treating other people as human beings. Everybody's kind of lost from this, person-to-person connection. So it makes sense on one level that if that part of your brain takes over, the other part of your brain's not functioning anymore. The part of your brain that probably builds your ego, sustains your ego, or thinks of yourself as a good person would probably nope out during those moments, because you're not treating anybody like a human being, and so you kind of lose that part of you that's in command of that. So whether or not there's some sort of psychological defense mechanism around forgetting you acting like that, or if acting like that just kind of erases that other thing. That's a interesting question.
That is an interesting question. I'm not sure, but the dehumanization aspect that you hit on,
Yeah.
that is something
You just,
that
they
is re
dehumanize themselves. We dehumanize ourselves in the process of dehumanizing somebody else. It happens over and over again.
yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think that is the case because to dehumanize someone else, I guess you would have to dehumanize yourself because you're no longer, aspiring to values, which is sort of ironic because you're dehumanizing others because, I mean, in the minds of a lot of people, the reason that they are dehumanizing and justified in dehumanizing other people is because they view them as, doing such offensive things that
They're a threat to humanity.
they're a threat to humanity. Exactly. And it's interesting how little one must do to be considered a threat to humanity.
Oh, have you been accused of any crimes against humanity of
I
late?
mean, I don't know if I've been, I'm sure I have. Yeah, apparently I've been called, people have said that in comments that you're not supposed to read, that I'm the reason everything is wrong with America, even though I'm Canadian.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
you're the
because they
reason.
project.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
because to me, they saw me as just a reflection of an ideology they don't like. So in this case, I was on Tim Pool's show, and it was
Hmm.
more of a debate format. So I think some of his viewers have very strong points of views of how they see people on the left. And since I was representing that side, some of them were very vocal in their disapproval. I mean, they said things like, I have eyes like a dead doll, and I'm everything that's wrong with the I do have dark eyes though. I mean, I have poor lighting for my eyes. So I guess I understand that. And the lighting there was really not good. So
Yeah,
I get
he's got a very stark set. It's not
very
inviting. I don't know
no, and all
why.
the lights come in from the top, which is a horrible way to light people. So
Yeah. Hmm.
it's not good lighting, and it does make you it did make me look a little more demon-like. I'll be honest. So
Wait, so
I
how
mean,
were you representing this group of political ideologues called the left? Well, like how, in what way were you representing this left thing?
well, because it's more of a debate show. In that case, the debate was about, I guess I picked the topic, and it was about
Oh,
the rise of the right wing woke, right?
okay.
I was really talking about how the woke on the left is not so dissimilar to what is now the woke on the right, because they were using similar tactics. So that was like the original debate. I mean, we went into other things too,
Hmm.
but because of it positioned as sort of
Yeah.
a debate between, sides, I think immediately people, it's like a sports team, and they really hate you if you're on the other sports team.
There's, I haven't really had a chance to engage with that way of framing things, but I have a problem with it when people say the right wing woke are just as bad as the left wing woke, but we have to completely reconfigure the definition of woke, which is already a lost word. It's just kind of means,
No, and I'm basing the woke
yeah, right.
on that definition that people now use, kind of more of a slur rather than the original
Okay.
definition of woke.
Yeah.
But when I talk about it, it's not that I'm saying they're identical,
Yeah.
or sorry, rather just as bad, but I think they could be just as bad. It's just a distribution of power issue, because I think we see more of the sort of the left woke. I mean, I don't even use these terms anymore,
Hmm.
but the distribution of power is higher on the left. So there is more control of institutions and things like that. So of course, there's going to be a larger impact coming from that.
But what do you mean by woke? Are you meaning it in this framework that we're talking about now? Are you meaning like some sort of moral authoritarianism? Is that what
I
is some
am
push
more
towards
moral
conformity?
authoritarian. Yeah,
Okay.
the moral
All right.
authoritarianism, being able to use certain kinds of tactics, like canceling people, for example, and also this
Hmm.
kind of vision of self as a victim. So the victimhood, I think that comes in for both sides.
Hmm.
So those are the things that I've observed because I've really spent a lot of time with, both on the left and the right. So, and of course I'm generalizing because there's such a variety of people, both on the left and the right, and different beliefs. And some people don't engage in that kind of behavior at all on either side.
Hmm.
But what I'm seeing, so my kind of theory is that part of why the left has become more authoritarian, and this is a cycle, but part of it is that there was this kind of sense of victimhood, and it wasn't an entirely untrue it's based in something, right? There was discrimination. So if you look at people, for example, minorities, there was discrimination. So they align more with the left because at the time the left was, more fighting for their rights. And but there is this kind of tendency to see one as victim. And when a victim becomes somebody with power, if there isn't very strong principles, then there is this temptation to use that power now to suppress other people, especially people that they might see as sort of an enemy in some way or
Hmm.
against them. And what I'm seeing sort of on the right now is that there is a level of victimization that happened, right? Because, people who, for example, when it comes to cancel culture, there has been more, while there have been apparently similar numbers of attempts on both sides, the side that was more effective has been the left. So there was a suppression of speech on the right. People on the right are more afraid of expressing their viewpoints, are afraid of losing their jobs, things like that, and feel like they don't have power against all these really powerful institutions, whether that's media or cultural institutions like productions or just, academia, all of that.
Hmm.
And so now they're starting to gain a little bit of momentum. So they're starting to get a little bit of power. And that power is now combined with a really strong resentment and the sort of idea that it's actually okay to use the same tools that were being used against them now against, their oppressor, essentially.
Hmm. And you don't see that as the proper outcome.
Well, I don't know. I think when I've talked to people about this, they view they don't like that I say this, first of all, and part of it is because they think that I'm only saying it because now they're using it against, quote unquote us. Um, but I've said it, when the left was doing it. And so I'm going to say it now to be consistent. And I think that some of them really feel strongly that that's the right thing to do. And what I hear them say is, well, we need this because it's so important. This is so important for us to get our country back, let's say. And it's okay for us to use the same tactics that were used against us because they're effective. Once we resolve these issues, then we'll go back to having, principles. And I hear that quite a bit. I certainly don't hear that from everyone on the right, but I hear that enough that it is a movement.
Hmm.
And I think that for me, it's not right for me because I am guided by principles much more than I am guided by any kind of ideology. So if my ideology is principles, I guess. And for me, things like, freedom of speech, suppression, sort of resisting the authoritarian impulses, whether they're on the right or the left, that's what's important to me. So when I see that, I don't think people are going to just become I don't think people are going to get power and then just relinquish that power and then suddenly adhere to principles. That's not how it ever works out. So, and
Hmm.
then now I'm seeing, well, people that I align with even less in some of my ideological beliefs, they're wanting power over me, right? So I don't, yeah,
Like
that
in what way?
doesn't seem appealing. Um, well, okay, for example, I was listening to a podcast the other day. It was a trigonometry, and it was a woman who I've seen her before, and I thought she was quite sensible, but I've never seen her, I guess, long form. And she is pro life, she has a pro-life position, but here she was talking more about pornography. And what sort of bothered me in that conversation is that, so I can understand some of her positions. She's quite good at articulating her positions. She is a thoughtful person, but ultimately she wanted to ban things like pornography. And it's not because I'm like a big advocate of pornography or a consumer that I have a problem with that. But it's the fundamental idea that one can decide what is to the benefit of someone else. Because when we're talking about abortion, it's a bit of a different conversation because the pro-life position is that you know, that you're protecting the child, and so it's a life. So I can understand that because you're not just like taking away somebody else's choice,
Yeah.
because you're actually protecting another person's choice. So whether I agree with that is irrelevant. I understand the position. It's not so much of an authoritarian argument in that way. But but in terms of this, it kind of is. So, I mean, she could make the argument that pornography is just overall bad for society. So by consuming it, you're also causing harm to society. So it's not like it's only affecting you. But that's a slippery slope because everything that I choose for myself ultimately can have some impact. So we can
Hmm.
extend that to, a lot of conservatives believe that, one should have women should stay at home and take care of kids, and we need more kids because it's actually better for our society, and especially in some countries because you see decreases in population. So you need more kids. And it's one thing to sort of encourage people to have more kids and provide conditions where they can make that choice and educate them on certain choices they can make. And the same thing with pornography. You can educate people and say, this is the harms that come from this, or you
Yeah.
regulate it, to ensure that, in terms of the victims of it. But it's another thing to say, now you have to have kids. You're mandated to have kids, or you can't do this. And that's where I think is the natural progression. So that's what scared me a little bit when I was listening to that podcast in particular, especially since she seemed like a very thoughtful, not an overly radical person.
Hmm. And what did she mean by banning pornography? Was that made clear at all, or
Completely.
practically?
So, yeah, at first it started with, just making it age, putting in an
Gated, yeah.
age, yeah, which is not a problem. But then she ultimately had progressed to, I think her main position was that it just shouldn't, you should make it completely illegal, but not necessarily illegal to consume, but illegal to produce. Because the way that she was making that argument was that the problem was fundamentally with the abuse that happens in the porn industry, and that it should be illegal. But then she also, when she was asked about, what about like, let's say, homemade porn, should that be illegal? And she said yes as well. So now it becomes more of a reflection, I think, of values. And then it progressed to towards the end of the interview where she really just admitted that she wants it completely banned, like from every angle. So completely illegal. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
People can go to
Yeah.
prison, be fined. I don't know how she would define the penalty,
Yeah,
but
I don't see that being practical. It's impractical.
that was the argument, I think, of the host. I don't think they thought it was practical either, actually. But what it showed me is that in her mind, in this person who seems, like I said, fairly sensible, logical person, calm, it seemed completely realistic. So it's not practical because it can't really happen. Um, but if she could make it happen, that's what she would do. So it's just a matter of power, not a matter of ethics or principles.
Well, no, no, I mean, I don't know about that because if she got all the power and she used it for her principles, that's still a principle. I don't know how she get that power to do that. Maybe she'd have to be unprincipled in order to get that power. I don't know how she'd get that power.
Well, I mean, she wouldn't be, I guess what I meant to say is that if she had the power, that's what she would do.
Yeah.
So it's not,
Deprive other
what
people
stops her
of
from doing
the,
that
yeah,
isn't this like the idea that people should be free to make their own choices. The
yeah.
thing that stops her is the fact that she can't do it. She can't implement it. But it doesn't mean that's impossible to implement ever. Things change. The world
Hmm.
changes. So,
Yeah.
which is why I care about, even when it starts from this level of discourse.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, is AI porn okay? Is drawing porn okay? If I took a pillow and draw two circles and a triangle on it and made love to it, would that count as a
I
sex
mean,
doll?
I wish they'd ask her. I mean, I think she would see the negative aspects of even AI porn because it's not just about the victim in this situation, but
Yeah.
also the idea that that's where you're channeling your energy. So I think she would find that wrong. But also, and I wish I had the statistic to back up because it's something I heard from someone else and I haven't been able to verify yet myself.
Mm.
But what was told to me was that in some places where it was sort of banned or made more illegal or more difficult to access, it actually increased the number of crimes, like more sexual crimes.
Yeah.
So there seems to be some evidence, and I have to look at it further to really be able to say that with certainty. But there is some evidence that it actually, while it does cause some issues as well, it might also manifest itself in a positive way too, which is interesting if that's the case. And it also tells you that when you try to force things top down, you are putting yourself in a way in a position of a godlike character who can predict the outcomes of everything.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. There's a nasty problem with trade-offs in this current reality. You take one thing away and it pops up over somewhere else. But there's also a challenge to what I think is your set of ideological beliefs called liberalism or being liberal. That is, it's an absence of values. Anybody can do anything, and then you see, if nobody can tell anybody what to do, we see rising. Well, it's probably easier to talk about, let's say, underage people's access to the internet. And we see a coincidence with teen girl or girls being given just widespread access to the internet and rising mental health conditions, and then rising desire for medicalization of a gender issue, or the rise in transhumanism, let's say, via transgenderism. It's all coinciding, right? So that's an obvious problem, that access to the internet is probably strongly correlated with mental health issues. And it could be the case that it's good for a generation to just shut off or tightly regulate their access to the internet.
Mm.
Is that something that you are able to support from your position of everybody should have the right to,
But you're talking about
self-determine?
kids, which I
Yeah.
find is a bit different. Because when I say talk, when I'm saying, everybody should have the right, it's adults that I'm talking about. Because I think with children, as a responsible parent, right, you would have to, um,
So you would
find what's right
advocate
for you.
for all parents should have the decision,
Yes, I think
whether or
parents
not.
should have the decision. And I think every child is different too. Some children, like I watched very adult movies when I was quite young. I don't think it did anything bad to me. I mean, by adults, I mean not porn. I'm just talking about like R-rated movies. And I
Hmm.
really don't think it like scarred me. But I think another child, might have a very different experience with that. I'm a little surprised now looking back that this was so unfiltered. I would say also something that was dumb, and I was kind of it's lucky that I got away with it unscathed, is that my access to internet as a teenage girl, and particularly this is the early days of the internet, so we didn't really understand a lot of these things. Like when you're chatting to strangers, there was no like education about it. And so I talked to adult people and as a teenage girl, and looking back now, I realize that was, why were these adult men talking to me, right? I look at it differently now. Now, again, I'm lucky, nothing really happened, but not everyone's lucky, and there's a lot of problems with this. So I think parenting involves like understanding at what level of maturity your child is, figuring
Yeah.
out what the right things are for that child. Um, Teaching them, giving them tools to understand the world better. And yeah, sometimes you want to restrict some access, sure. I mean, one thing that I hated that was I think scarring, like all the porn pop-ups. I didn't need to see that. I don't want to see that. And that was like that wasn't even something I was consenting to in any way. Not that I was, at that age consenting. And so, and my parents did monitor, they didn't allow me unlimited time to use the computer. And I hated it as a teenager. I really did because, and I would find ways to sneak more time in.
Why did you want so much internet? What was
I think
so,
it's addictive. I think there's an element that's addictive and you were out on the outside world, but at the same time,
huh?
and now I think it's even harder. I mean, back then, I will say before the internet, I was far more productive. As a teenager, I was hyper focused. I wrote books and scripts as a teenager. I started a couple of companies, um, and I could just, my attention was on. I just had this radioactive attention. I don't know how to call it, but it was just
Hmm.
very, very, very intense. And then as I got older and spent more time with the internet, endless distractions, endless stimuli, it rewired my brain. Like I don't have the same ability to focus. And I think in
Hmm.
general, we need time to just be bored and let our minds wander. But I'm always like, I need something constantly. And I don't think that's a healthy thing. And it's not healthy for kids and it's not healthy for adults. I met
Hmm.
a couple when I was in London, on the train there that actually did forbid their child from having a phone. They didn't give her a phone. And that at a certain age, I think at 16, that was the agreement is that, she can choose it for herself. So she was so excited at 16. Now she gets to go on the internet and go on social media. She spent like a week or so on it and she voluntarily gave the phone away
Really?
because she felt the how negative that experience was for her. And as much as it probably is difficult for her not to access the things that all these other teenagers are accessing, it probably helped her brain development quite a bit. So as a parent, I think you do get to make that choice for your child, and you should. Um, Now, other people might disagree and find more value in the, access to internet because you learn things, you explore things. Maybe there are questions that you can't ask other people, but you get to ask the internet, and it might actually save your life if you're too embarrassed to ask something. So it's difficult to say, one thing is completely bad and one thing is completely good. There's
Hmm.
cons and pros. But should parents decide? Yes. But when we're talking about liberalism, I'm talking about adults making decisions. And adults make bad decisions too. I mean, there's not like this magic thing where you turn
They do?
18. Well, some of us, not you, of course.
I don't make any decisions.
Oh,
Shout
okay.
those
They
out.
get
Yeah.
made for you. Okay.
Yeah.
No, but you don't turn 18 and you're like, "Oh my God, I know everything now. I'm never going to make any mistakes." But we just have to decide on some number, whether that's 18 or 16 or 21 or 25. There's, apparently the brain continues developing as it until 24, 25, and then it
Hmm.
stops and you die. I don't know.
Do you perceive what this group called the right want to achieve?
Hmm.
Do you see what that is? And do you see them as a dangerous force, or do you see the rightness as a dangerous force that's rising in the wings?
I'll be honest, I am for, instead of lying to you, no, I'll be honest for a change. It's, I do see the threat. I didn't see it before. I was more like enthusiastically talking to people on the right in the past, and there's still people that I'll enthusiastically talk to because, we might not agree on everything, but I think they're coming from a good place. They have good morals. They're decent human beings, and that's really how I judge people. And a lot of them are as concerned as I am, by the way, about some of these things, and they're seeing it too. So it's not just me like being a liberal and being freaked out by this. It's just what I see is more extreme. It's an extremist ideology that's rising, and I'm just upset about it when it's on the left. It's just that I'm seeing it quite vividly on the right.
Where? Or in what way does it manifest?
I mean, right now because I'm not like, it's not the real world that I'm spending that much time in.
Yeah.
With conservatives, it's more online. So it's more in the conversations that I hear, on social media and, spaces also on social media. It's coming from a certain group on the right. Like one thing I realized that the right is a very wide, group net. There's kind of old school conservatives that have very similar views probably than I do to mine on many things. Then there is sort of the centrist, right of center, which, they're a little bit more conservative on some things, but are quite open-minded and still respect personal freedoms. And even a little bit to the right of that is like that. But I think it's like the younger generation, if I had to say, it's the young right that sort of has this like very aggressive way of looking at the world and things. And they are the ones who are saying, yes, we're going to use the same tools. We need to force people to do these things. It's that authoritarian impulse that I'm seeing. And it's interesting that it's coming more from younger people than I see it in older people.
It kind of, you think young men?
Men and women, both.
Really?
Yeah.
What's the difference between the men and the women that you see? In their aesthetic and what they want. Do you see much of a difference?
Honestly, no, because the women sort of confirm what the men say. So I don't really see, because the women, for example, this idea of women should just, make sandwiches and stay at home, and have kids and obey the man. It's not something that I'm just hearing from men. In fact, I hear that more from the women than I do from the men. Like, I think the men are a little less inclined to say that out loud, in some cases, even if they think that. But the women are, it's almost like one of their power plays. And it's not because by the way, it's not like I'm judging people for staying home with kids and having kids. You can be a stay-at-home mom. It's just this kind of idea that this is what women are meant for, and women who don't fit that mold are somehow harmful to society, which is really the narrative that they're spreading.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, they're harmful to society. They are decadent. It's this very negative way of looking at people, as opposed to looking at, okay, well, we make different choices, and some of us are meant for different things. And being a stay-at-home mom, I think, is absolutely a legitimate pursuit, but and can be a very good thing. But also, one thing that bothers me with that is that, for example, if women don't educate themselves and have no recourse, like sometimes marriages fail for various reasons. And also people die, spouses die. So it might not even be, you might have said, till death do us apart, and 100% both parties meant it, but somebody encounters death too early. And then what does the woman do? So, I mean, I don't know. Does that make me a hyper feminist? I don't think so.
You keep on bringing up this term education. Like that's the principle. It seems that seems to be your tool, or your rubric to judge whether or not a group of people is on the right track. what degree can they be educated about the dangers of this, or educated in order to make informed decisions? It seems like education is the bedrock of your ideology. And I mean that just in a very, very soft term, not in the strong term
No,
of
I
ideology.
understand what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I haven't looked at it that way, but I guess so. Because to me, rather than saying, hey, you should behave this way, or censoring something, for example, on social media, I've always sort of talked about how I'd rather provide more intel, more data, more information to people and improve their toolkit for being able to discern things. So whether, media literacy, things like that, educating people on how to think for themselves better and how to figure out what the traps are. For example, how do you determine what's an AI generated image versus a real one, what to look for? I'd rather people have the tools to figure things out for themselves rather than decide on their behalf, we're not going to show you this. So that's where I position myself, or things like I bring up a lot, things like community notes. So instead of saying you can't say that because you're wrong, allowing sort of, it's maybe not perfect, but it's a good tool because it doesn't, even if you disagree with the outcome of the community note, it doesn't take away the original post. It just gives you more context, which you can decide that, hey, I don't agree with it for whatever reason, because you can look at the sourcing, or you say, that actually makes sense, and I got this wrong. I am so glad I have more context now. So yes, I believe in that way, contextualizing things more, giving people more information, even things like, abortions, right? Like I think one way, if you want to discourage people from having abortions, is educating them more on, safe sex, but also giving them life skills so that they choose, make better choices for themselves, and also giving them more options of what to do if they find themselves in that situation, which is not just education, but also addressing the root issue. So
A
it's,
tunnel out of Idaho
yeah, like a
into a,
tunnel out of Idaho could be a good solution for so they shuffle the baby out. But it is a way of, I think you'd see a decrease if somebody is having an abortion because they just don't want to keep the child, right? Because it's going to ruin their life, whatever reason they have for it. You can address that better. You can give them the option of, for example, giving that child up for adoption and make it easier for them to do so by setting up, a certain environment to do so, giving them care for their medical care. And maybe there would even be a financial incentive of some sort. I mean, you have to be careful with that because certainly you don't want to encourage people just to have kids in order to give them up for adoption, I mean. But, I think allowing people, like taking away the hindrances that prevent people from making better choices, or what we might think or you might think is a better choice, I think is a better way than like forcing someone to make that choice. That's essentially what I think. And then I think education, yes, in terms of educating people so they can make better choices for themselves, and that when they look at information that doesn't add up, that they can tell, without me having to say, "Oh, this is wrong. You shouldn't think that," or censoring or taking away their ability to see somebody else's speech, because I don't think one entity should be deciding what one should see or not. And I think it's interesting to me because those are liberal values, maybe abandoned a bit, but those are very liberal values that a lot of conservatives took on. So
yeah.
interesting.
But so there was this event that occurred a few years ago called like COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-19, something like
really?
that. And there was this broad scale response to that caused, a lot of reshuffling of how people live their life and a lot of rules set on their behavior, and then also mandating of medical care across the board with very little
I think
wiggle
I heard
room
of that.
that was
Yeah.
personalized. I think it affected Canada as well, and maybe
I
even
think so.
particularly acutely
Yeah.
compared to the
Yeah.
United States. in times of emergency, all this great talk about education and having discussions and making informed decisions tends to be thrown out the window, and people come in and make decisions for you because we're going to die otherwise. I guess that would be the ultimate excuse and stuff. With regard to the response to the upper respiratory virus or whatever it was named COVID-19, how did the response to that and the way that people behaved around that inform or change your opinion on maybe on like your liberal assumptions, or on how liberalism is weak or needs to be strengthened?
Yeah. Well, I think it actually taught me a lot of things. So I think my position throughout the pandemic was a pretty liberal position, actually, which is interesting because it was more supported by conservatives. And that position was, I did not believe in the mandates. I did not agree with that. I wanted people to have free choice. And it has nothing to do with how I feel about the vaccine itself. And I did a lot of research. It was unprecedented. There was no other such case. So there was a lot of,
What do you mean it was unprecedented?
There
In
was
what way?
never a mandate for any other vaccine. The ones that they brought up was in schools you have to get certain vaccinations in some states, some provinces. However, in those situations, you still have the option of not going to school, for example. You can just homeschool. So it's not, and you never had a situation where you couldn't leave the country. So so this was a very exceptional situation legally. And
Do you know Schmidt at all?
no.
Carl Schmidt. He's kind of loosely associated with the Nazi Party for some reason or another, but he was a legal philosopher in
I'm so
Germany.
glad
And
I didn't say he's my best friend. Yeah.
oh yeah, well no, I mean yeah, he's got some ties that stain him, but he writes extensively about power and how whoever gets to make the exception is the one who has the power, the exception to your liberties. The one who gets to take away your rights is the one who has power.
Yeah,
And
that
that's
seems
what
fair.
was exercised by your very handsome communist asshole of a dictator up there called Trudeau.
Yep. I mean, what he did was quite stunning to me. I mean, invoking the, freezing bank accounts, invoking military powers. That just showed me how quickly power can be abused, right, and turn authoritarian. I don't think anybody really expected that. Even people who don't like him. I just don't think that was, it's pretty stunning because when I tell people about that in other countries, and I'm talking about left-leaning people, they're all really stunned by it. It's not something that sits well with people. And in Canada as well. Like, I don't think most people thought that was okay. That was definitely a step way, 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 way too far. And that's where I started seeing him as more of an active threat, as opposed to just somebody I didn't like, some of the virtue signaling, et cetera, et cetera. It This was now to me an actively dangerous person, and an actively dangerous system because, that system props up the person. But it was not liberal in any way. It was
Hmm.
illiberal. It was completely illiberal. And what I saw in the way that not just the restrictions and the restrictions themselves, and I mean, they didn't make much sense either in many cases, but also the fact that people weren't questioning things, and then the part where it was so quick to see how vilified people were for not, taking the vaccine, whether you think they're dumb or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Like the level of dehumanization that I saw was just absolutely terrifying. It was something that I spoke out against, and which it's people attacked me for or called me a conspiracy theorist.
Hmm.
I didn't talk about the vaccine itself because I just don't think that I have the knowledge, or it's not something that I took a stance on. But in terms of mandates, in terms of passports, things like that, I think the fact that more people didn't speak out is very sad.
Well, maybe they did and you couldn't hear them. I mean, I had my channel suspended just this year, years after the response to the upper respiratory virus called COVID-19 or whatever it is, came out, and I talked about that treatment in detail with the doctor. Like, what does it do? You're not supposed to even talk about what it does. You can't talk about that.
I put out a podcast with a vaccine injured person more recently, and she has, I mean, this is not just somebody claiming that, she's documented. And I thought, and the reason we kind of talked about both, she's a very sensible person, very not one of those crazy people, which some of them are, you have to admit. And then she didn't want to be used by sort of just, run of the mill anti-vaxxers. So we did a really great podcast episode. My parents liked it. And it was taken off of YouTube.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I did
Why are we talking about
challenge
this?
it. What?
No, I hope this episode doesn't get striked off of YouTube.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, I hope so too. But I will say that I did challenge it and it got put back. So,
Okay.
I think I think a lot of the censoring that's currently going on isn't even human. I think it's most likely AI, but but some of it was, and obviously there's instructions and keywords that it's looking for.
So in times like that, so when the whole thing about that virus and then the treatment of the virus comes out, there's this debate. Everybody in the discussion has 20 or 30 different studies, and nobody's a virologist, or maybe a few are, but then there's this consensus and the trust the science, or science isn't something that you trust, and all that stuff goes on. Education doesn't seem to be the way through it. Maybe. I mean, I have to be careful how I say that. I don't mean that exactly, but the process of debate, the process of argument, the process of deliberating over this thing doesn't seem to have any sort of end, any sort of boundary. It's just a bunch of people using research or using so-called science to enforce their position back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It just is so confusing.
Well, part of it is the environment that was created because it's so adversarial. I don't think you get a lot of benefit if people are just like debate. I don't love debates. Like I think that, when I was in high school, I thought it was fun. And I had a trick for winning, but it's not, I don't think it's so helpful when people are debating. And I sat in on a lot of debates and I've participated in some. I don't think it brings out the best in you. And I think it's like you only put forward the arguments that help you win, but you're not putting forward the things that might help you get closer to the truth of something. So it's immediately adversarial and you're protecting your position. And I don't think that's very helpful. And particularly when it comes to scientific discourse, it's really unhelpful. Ideally, you want an environment where scientists can disagree with each other. And you're right. Like I think some random people picking up studies, this is why I don't have a particular point of view on some things, because I haven't read all these studies, but also I'm not a scientist. Yeah. I don't have that knowledge. And I don't think anyone should frankly listen to me on some of these things. But there are people who are scientists, and particularly when they are experts in a particular, specialists in a particular subset of science that's relevant, right? Because there's so many types of science, and people will study, a little microorganism for years and years of their lives, and they don't necessarily know something about something else. And then those same people they trust the scientists that are specialists in this particular area to tell them, what's what. And so the problem is that when you have a scientific community where basically people can dissent, because there is sort of a political aspect to it of, whether I'm not talking political like Democrats, Republicans, I'm talking about political, just stature and relationships and all that kind of stuff, certain consensuses. When you don't have absolute freedom to sort of research and talk about things, and when it is so adversarial and people are just defending their positions, you don't get to do the scientific process, right? So you don't get to the truth. And
yeah.
I don't know how many things wrong about. In my book, I write about some of the chapters about climate science, climate change, and also the pandemic. And the people who were involved in these conversations are specialists, right? They're not some random person. Now, I don't think Brett Weinstein is one of the people in the book, and I don't, he's a evolutionary biologist, so he's not like I don't see him as a pandemic specialist, but he does have some scientific background, so I think he's allowed to have opinions. But more so, I'm more concerned, I would say, about the people who are specialists being able to have absolutely free discourse. And the other side of freedom is that, there's pharmaceutical companies or other entities that are funding research. So often some research won't ever get tackled because it has no funding. And other research is very much encouraged to come to a particular conclusion. So whether intentionally or unintentionally, some things might be omitted. So I think the key is having a thorough scientific process where nobody's view is suppressed, particularly within the scientific community.
It's so the process of education, or education as a process towards discovering the truth, is premised on discourse that is not impassioned, combative. So states of emergency, or one way to shut down education, is to provide a state of emergency. Where it's really, really important in one way or another that somebody's right or somebody's wrong.
Well, that's why people were willing to give up their rights so much, I think, because they were, including me, by the way. I mean, in the beginning, I was pretty compliant with everything because I was as scared as everyone, and I thought, or as many people anyways, maybe not everyone was scared, but I was. It was a pretty serious strain, and the thing is, I did trust the institutions who to do what's best for us. Really, I did, and so I did put that trust in. It's just that I started seeing so many inconsistencies that doubt started creeping in. But you're right; it's an excellent time to shut down, certain kinds of speech. In fact, they would say, by having these types of speeches, you're endangering people, right? And even true speech, because you can see with Facebook, for example, and I'm sure Facebook was not the only entity, but there was pressure to take down true speech, right? So it wasn't even things that they themselves considered, disinformation or misinformation, neither of these two words. It was actually the truth. But knowing certain things would then, potentially endanger people because they might make the wrong decision. That to me is the most scary thing. When I found that out, I was pretty stunned by that because I can see, I don't agree with it, but I can see why they might want to take down disinformation and misinformation. The problem is they might get that wrong. But to take down something that they know is true in this kind of authoritarian, godlike status where they can predict and control people's behavior and essentially take away their free will, that just was pretty stunning to see.
So I don't know, I don't see it yet, this danger from the right, but the people that are in my wheelhouse, and I'm basically de facto a liberal because that's how I behave, or that's kind of the system that I tentatively trust, and that's the system that I grew up in. And by liberal, I mean the free association of ideas and people and listening to things and allowing, just allowing broad ranges of behavior and speech. And then also aesthetically kind of being very wary of authoritarianism. Those are the people in that, in my association group that are in that, or more liberal or more conservative, or maybe even a little leftist. I don't trust leftists since the evergreen thing, but some of them are saying that there's something on the right that I should watch out for, that we should be wary of. Like there's this mounting anger and authoritarianism, and I understand historically that the right has, well, I guess certain political movements that have been associated with the right have gone very far towards a sense of ethnic purity or social purity or values-based enforcement, and the stripping or the exchanging of certain sorts of freedom of behavior for mandatory alignment to a code of behavior. And I can see that. I resist that, but at the same time, I also see that just pure libertinism or liberalism without teeth, or liberalism, I don't even know if liberalism has any teeth. We were probably just in a place where we trusted each other enough, and we took certain things for granted, and those things have been shown over the course of the last 5 or 7 years to not really exist in our institutions. So I can see the desire for some sort of conglomeration of people that want to enforce values that are good for society as opposed to deleterious for society. And I'm kind of in favor of a return to that, but I want it from the bottom up. I want it to be done, or I think that the only way that it would be done properly is that people opt into that. And I don't know how people en masse will opt into that without some of those people making some pretty strong claims about, that could be construed as aesthetically fascist, like kind of, promoting a certain sort of moral standard, a certain sort of moral behavior, and championing that. And you bring up, I guess, these trad wives or something like that, saying, those wine moms, those cat ladies, they're bad for the human race. They suck men away from virtue, and they suck resources away from us, or they suck stature away from us. And so we will vilify them, but there's a difference, and a full circle. There's a difference between vilifying people's choices and then mandating those choices.
Yeah.
And vilifying is still a part of free speech, even though I'm kind of wary of it because it does tend towards authoritarianism, but it's the court of public opinion.
Well, they like to call it shaming. So they even say, right, they use the term
it's their
shaming.
kink.
They believe in shaming, and they want to shame people for whether it's their sexuality or their choices, domestically. I think that does align with authoritarianism. It's just they just don't have the, like, do you think that if they had the power, which they don't, but if they had that power to mandate it, do you think they wouldn't?
Well, if they did and they mandated certain behaviors, would it be better for society? Like, there's going to be a trade-off. It's not going to be all bad to, let's say, ban porn, or it's not going to be all bad to reinforce monogamy. It's not going to be all bad for the children, but you're going to have a lot, and I can hear the feminist argument, you're going to have a lot of women who are going to be locked into relationships that are really bad for them. They're going to have a lot of women whose not having access to independence is going to make them very dependent on very untrustworthy men.
And that's the difference between certain ideologies, I think, is that one might value the end result a bit more, where it's, okay, you might have better monogamy will lead to these, for example, these better outcomes in these ways and this ways. But there's trade-offs. But so they value that structure more than they value personal choice. And I guess I inherently value personal choice above the success, I guess, of that structure. And I guess that's fundamentally a belief than it is a...
Does personal choice scale well? Does personal choice scale well?
Not always. Not always.
And what kind of population can do best with personal choice? It would be an educated population.
An educated population.
And then how do you educate a population?
I mean, I think it's a combination of things, actually. I mean, if sincerely, I think there's a lot of criticisms about schools, which I think there's certainly a lot of issues with our education and many aspects. But But I also think it starts with the family structure and with families. And I guess that's what you were getting at. But I say it's structure. It can be still a single parent, but obviously it's better
Yeah.
when it's two parents. But
Yeah.
but having parenting where the parents are very involved and teach you certain values and value education and curiosity and encourage that, especially in your early development days, I think that's what sets people up for success. Because it's not like I wasn't being brainwashed in my high school days either. Like the teachers had all sorts of crazy beliefs and but it didn't really affect me very much. I don't think I really listened to them that much beyond the subject matter. And I'd say that's because my parents instilled in me this critical thinking, challenging views, just thinking for myself. And so I always had a skeptical, I guess, outlook on anything anybody said. Doesn't mean I disbelieved them immediately, but it wasn't, I also, nor did I take them at face value immediately. And so I think that really immaculated me against some crazy ideas. I just don't think I took anything like that from school.
So what I see or what I hear is you advocating a certain sort of culture of curiosity and diligence with regard to not necessarily academic performance, but skeptical, critical thinking, I guess, rather,
Yeah.
is kind of the what you're wanting to foster. Is that kind of one of the seeds of your book, No Apologies?
I
Like,
mean, we
what's the
talked,
message? What, like,
yeah.
if you were allowed to actually state your value system or your virtue, your core ethic, the one that you would enforce if you had ultimate power.
I mean, then the best one that is really the key for me is curiosity. Because curiosity solves a lot of problems. Curiosity means that you're going to talk to other people. It means you're going to listen to other people because you want to understand what they're actually thinking. That on its own would resolve a lot of issues. Curiosity also encourages you to learn and dig deeper into things. So I think curiosity is really the fundamental thing that if I had to force something in my authoritarian impulse, if I can just wave a wand and make everyone curious, I think that would do a lot of good. And I don't think it would do a lot of harm, actually. And maybe there is
Hmm.
something I haven't thought of, but I don't think it would.
Did you ever hear about the Bible?
Yes, I heard of it.
Yeah, in the very beginning,
There's
there were
many
two
of them, by the
people.
way. Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, whatever. The Talmud. What? No, not the Talmud. No, the Pentateuch. What's the other word for it? Jewish word for the first five?
Well, the Tanakh is one, the
Okay,
Torah.
anyways. Yeah, the
Okay.
Torah. Yeah. Well, there was two people that were curious,
Mhm.
and that got them into a whole lot of trouble.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. You're
So,
right. You're right. Curiosity can lead to trouble. That is true. You're right. You found my problem area. So see, there's nothing perfect.
yeah.
There's always some unpredictable or predictable consequences to a choice, which is why
Hmm.
I believe in free choice. But
Hmm.
in my book, I think the main point of the book was more that when you don't allow when you don't use your own voice to say what you mean, you allow the really loud radical voices to take over and dictate what our world is going to be like, what our future is going to be like, which I do view as
Hmm.
very dangerous because why would you want a world controlled by radicals?
Yeah, it's that Bertrand Russell quote, I guess. It's like the problem with the world being that those who are filled with doubt and thought are so quiet, and those who are absent of curiosity are so loud and take up all the air in the room. So it's
It's very
constantly a
true.
fight to rile up the soft spoken.
It is. But the soft spoken, I don't know if you believe me now, but I'm one of the soft spoken people.
No, you keep your tone well. I mean, you're not
Yes, I
short
keep
spoken, but you're soft spoken.
Yeah, no, it's true. I speak very softly, but I also was a very shy person. I still am. I mean, it wasn't like I'm somebody who's and I'm not full of conviction. I'm full of doubt. Like I'm constantly changing my mind and rethinking and I try to share that with people because I think it's important for people to understand that. I think there is a tendency to sort of follow those people who seem so convinced that they're correct and they have
Yeah.
this self-conviction. I
Yeah.
understand that. Like it's very
Seems like
attractive.
the court of public opinion favors those with strong opinions.
A
That's why
hundred
that's another
percent.
problem that I have with the court of
It does
public
because
opinion.
most people I don't think have certainty. So when they see somebody who seems like they really know what's up,
Yeah.
they tend to follow them. And
It's a
there's a
good feeling to be
it's a good
right.
feeling because then you don't have, yeah, and then you don't have to think about it so much for yourself. It gets rid of your own self-doubt, which is very uncomfortable to live with. And I think that's part of why people follow those people. But I don't trust people who are not able to admit, change their minds on things or say that they're wrong on something or be a little bit unsure. But unfortunately, like you said, in the court of public opinion, the people I like to listen to are more doubtful, not so self-assured, but they're not the popular people. They're not the popular kids at the table.
Yeah. Yeah, there's very few revolutions of ambivalence.
Correct. But I worry, but yeah, and look, do we need revolutions sometimes? Yeah, I mean, to get to certain place. No, but I'm okay. Well, to get to certain places, right? There's sometimes no other choice, or it's going to take a very long time. But at the same time, revolutions are always going to be bloody and awful. And I mean, there's some things I really want to change about the structures that
Name
exist, and
one.
government structures, for example, and how the voting system works. But there's really no way to change that without a revolution, is the conclusion I've come to. But I don't want a revolution
Hmm.
because I know what that's going to lead to. And so maybe we make do with what we have, but improve on that a bit and, work to make certain things better within it so we can have a better outcome and it
Yeah.
will take much longer and it won't be as good as what I want, but
Yeah.
I don't want, but then people won't die.
Yeah. 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 But you'll have to be patient.
Very. And I'm not very patient.
No?
No.
Well, you're patient enough to write a book or a few.
Yeah, it was honestly, that's why I was like, I think my first line in the book is something like, I never wanted to write a book. And and it's true. I didn't think I'd have the patience. And I definitely lost my patience quite a few times with it. But I'm surprised. I'm really happy that I think there's no fulfillment that you feel more strongly than when you do something that's really painful, that really is hard for you. You don't think you're going to get through it, but you push through it and you get it out. I think you feel because you've sort of kept a promise to yourself. Right?
Yeah. Where is it available and or
Yeah.
when? It's available now.
No, it's available. So it's available as of January 30, which I don't know when people will be seeing this, but January 30, it's available and you can order it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Barnes and Noble even has it in their physical stores, which is kind of cool.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, Indigo if you're in Canada. And then you know what? Apparently even Walmart has it, which is that was a little surprising, but kind of I don't know, kind of cool.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, I'm pretty excited about it actually. And I just got my author copies today in the mail. So I saw it for the first time right before we started filming this. And it was kind of neat to hold it in my hand, I have to say. And it looks a bit better than it looks different when it's in physical form than it does on just like a PDF file. So I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I actually kind of like it. And so I
Wow.
put it behind me because I'm like, see, this is the thing that authors do.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's lame, I don't care. Like you write a book and then don't put it behind you. But
I'm
if
not judging you. I've written my share. I just need to get them published at some point. But
good,
now
you
you get to go
should.
on podcasts and somebody can come along and do a compilation of you saying my book, my book, my book, my book, my book, my book.
I don't say quite as much as maybe one might think, but I've been working on that because naturally I'm like very non-self-promotional, and
Yeah.
you kind of have to, where people don't know about any your book.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I, I've been having to get over some stuff, but I I now have had people read it. So when I was, I'll be honest, when I was, going through the drafts and copy editing and going back and forth with my publisher, I think I sent him an email saying, I actually like this book. It's quite good. I've now read it multiple times and it's actually pretty good. And he's like, yes, but that's not going to save you from, getting whacked over the head. That's not the word to use, but whacked over the head by haters who just don't like the topic. I'm like, okay, fair
Hmm.
enough. At least maybe they'll read it. That's good. That's a start. But now I've had people just read it, who, got some early copies and they had really good responses. So I'm like, so it's not just me. I'm not delusional. At
Hmm.
least some people like it, but I don't know when the bad reviews are, if hopefully there won't be any, but if a bad
No,
review
no,
comes
no, no.
in, I
You want
expect it. I'm
them.
sure there will, but
You want haters. That means that your ideas are scaling. If
yes.
there's nobody pissed off at you, it's like you're the tree fallen in the forest.
For me, I wrote this book because I wanted to reach people who don't already think exactly the same stuff. Like I wrote it also in a way where I was hoping to do that. So it wasn't meant to go, of course, there's going to be people who are going to read it who are going to already agree with me on all of this stuff. And that's probably the easiest demographic to sell a book to. I want to reach the people who I'm less sure would pick this book up. And some encouragement in that area is that when I shared some blurbs from the book with some people on the side that I wouldn't expect to embrace it as much. Actually, people were really curious about it and ordered it. So, I think, which by the way, you can pre-order the book if you watch this before it comes out. See, I did the writer
Good
thing.
job. Good job.
But it's something that that was a very pleasant surprise because I will say this to you. When I first shared this book, I shared it with people on, who follow me on X. People who follow me on X and other platforms already know where I stand with this stuff. So I wasn't expecting to be attacked by them or anything like that. But where I hesitated is sharing it on my personal Facebook,
Hmm.
which I haven't been using very much, but that's all my liberal friends, left leaning liberal. I don't have any
Yeah, that's
conservatives
the
on
only
there.
people who use that godforsaken app anymore.
Probably. But I was hesitating about sharing it there and I almost didn't. And then I thought to myself, I wrote a book about using your own voice and not having so much fear about doing that or actually, it's okay to have fear, but you need to get over the fear is kind of the point. So who am I if I can't do that? So I shared it, and to my surprise, because really wasn't sure what the reaction would be, but to my surprise, it was extremely supportive. And like I said,
Hmm.
people ordered the book and were very encouraging. And now I've started sharing some blurbs even on like LinkedIn, and people seem pretty excited about it. And so I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. That sometimes you'll be surprised. Sometimes when you say what you mean and it might feel a little dangerous, sometimes you'll be pleasantly surprised. People
Hmm.
will surprise you. Maybe they agree with you, or maybe they just support you. Like with my friends, I can say anything with my close friends, right? And I have absolute comfort and certainty that they're not going to judge me because they understand who I am as a human being and where things are coming from. They can disagree with me, they can debate me. It doesn't matter. I want them to if they disagree. But they know who I am as a human being, and they know I'm not some raging racist, sexist, or whatever you want to call it. They know my intentions are always coming from a pure place. And that's a true friendship, I think, when you always assume the best of your friend. But you can be open with each other and you can also be critical with each other. And so you find out who is a real friend when you speak sincerely and authentically, and that's what I found. And certainly
Hmm.
there's some people who've distanced more, right? None of my close friends have though. And it's something that also, yeah, I think you'll be both surprised in good ways and bad ways. People you might expect to understand might not and might turn away and you might lose friends. That can happen. That has happened to a lot of people. Um, but you might also find that your existing friendships grow to be much better, much stronger, much more authentic, and much more real, sincere.
Earlier in the conversation, I let this question pass me by. But now that we're at the end, I feel like it's time, before I let you go, to ask, why were you in London? You just you nonchalantly, when I was in London, you start to tell your London stories.
I mean, I get around, but actually,
Oh, do you?
I do. But I was actually living in Hungary at the time. So I spent 3 months in Hungary doing a fellowship. And then from there, it's much easier to get to London. So I went to do a podcast in London and also just visit some friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They just have podcasters in London that are just throwing their net to any Canadian expats in Hungary.
There's one in particular that is a good one that I like very much.
Oh, okay. You're not going to name drop?
I can name drop. I don't think it's secret. It's trigonometry.
Oh, cool. Yeah. They're great guys.
Yeah, I really like because they invite such a diverse range of people, and they're good at sort of, with some of their guests, they're good at following up. I mean, I like that about you too, because you don't just you're not agreeable, in the sense that if you disagree with something or you're trying to clarify a thought, you'll ask me, you'll follow up on it, right? So. I think that makes it a more interesting experience, both for the person who's the guest, but also for the audience. And so I appreciate when I watch their podcasts that they do that in a way that's not confrontational, or they're not debating the guest, but they are sometimes clarifying the points of view or pushing back a little bit, right? But in a way that I think makes you understand the positions better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I enjoy. And I think a lot of people in this discourse have become a little bit more radicalized and more feeding their existing audience. And I think those guys are good at sort of maintaining a curiosity and also bringing, not necessarily always playing to the crowd, which I think is really important, because you can't be an independent thinker if you're just, playing to your audience, or otherwise known as audience capture, which I saw happen to a lot of people. I know that it hasn't happened to me, and I only say this with confidence because my audience constantly disagrees with me.
Oh,
so, yes.
That's a great thing to have cultivated.
Yeah, I think they feel free to disagree. Now I have, since the events of October 7th, it's gotten a little bit feisty out there. So I have some rules of engagement, and I used to engage with anybody, no matter how they came at me, until maybe a few years ago. Now I sort of look, okay, if you come you're not personally attacking me, you're coming with an idea, feel free to disagree. If you're now engaging in personal attacks and lies and just that kind of stuff, that's a little bit different. I don't engage with that, and I don't believe in doing that anymore. But anybody can express their point of view as long as they've, given it some thought and it's coming in good faith. That's just what they're thinking. And some people, I'll engage with people when I feel like they've made a really strong counterpoint. And I think it's not that uncommon for me to say, you're right about this. That's interesting. Let me think about this a little bit more. I didn't know that. So I think that's how I actively stay away from being captured, because it's very, I know that if I tweet something or say something, I know certain things will go viral and they'll be really popular, and certain people in my audience will love it. But I really try hard to stay away from that, and very intentional about it.
So the book's over. What's coming up next? I guess you have to go on these tours, right?
I don't know if I get to do a tour, but that would be interesting. But I mean, the book is the thing that I've been really focused on and just doing some writing. I have my podcast, but I've sort of put it on pause, especially when I was in Hungary. Like doing podcasts in Hungary was not. I recorded a couple, but it was very difficult. Um, so I'm actually hoping to do another book after this. So I already have like
Hmm.
a proposal for one. So I'm hoping I get to write another book. So that's my hope. If not, I guess I'll just continue sort of. It's very difficult for me to think about going back to non-independent writing at this point because it's just my outlook on things has changed so much and what I want to write about has changed so much, and I want to have utter freedom to express myself. And you can't have that within any kind of structure. But I don't know. I'm a little bit lost right now, I'll be honest.
Hmm.
I just hope that I get more opportunities to connect with people and write and learn. And I'd be very happy if I get to do all of that.
Hmm. Well, you have the chops and the
Thank you.
hunger. You have the drive. So I hope you
For a
get
lazy
everything.
person, yeah.
Oh, really? You're lazy? You're always
I'm
doing
in here.
things.
I know it's super weird because I am a lazy person, which means I find shortcuts. But I don't I'm both I'm a contradiction. Like I'm both truly I am lazy, but I am doing things all the time because I'm also like very motivated by creating new things. So I've
Hmm.
always had that temperament where I'm like, oh, I have this idea. Okay, let's go in and do it. And I don't think too much about it. I just kind of do it, which
Yeah.
means I often abandon many of these ideas once they get to a point of like, oh, it's a lot of hard work. And I'm
Yeah.
not so in love with this idea anymore. But but yeah, there's like a level of laziness as well. So there's hope for lazy people, is
There
what
is
I'm saying.
hope for lazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least you're not a radical. I mean.
At least I'm not a radical. Not yet. Not yet. Anybody can become one, by the way. I think
Oh,
it's
really?
important to
Okay.
remember.
So
Yeah, I
stay
think it's
vigilant.
important.
Vigilant.
Vigilante?
Yeah, no, stay vigilant
Oh, vigil.
against
Yeah,
radicalization.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the most important lesson is like anybody can become anything if you don't adhere to certain things, if you don't stop and think about things, and you don't check yourself. Because I've seen so many people get more extreme. I hope I haven't. Some people I know think I have actually. So,
Hmm.
and
It's a
have told me
temptation.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Catherine, thank you very much for reaching out. It's great to hang out with you again, have a conversation
Likewise.
again.
Thank
Your
you.
book, No Apologies, is at every Walmart, apparently. So
Pretty
just
Walmart.
go to your
Easier to
local.
get on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, but
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
also
it'll come to
Walmart.
your doorstep, but it's not offered on DoorDash. Is there a DoorDash for books? I guess that would just be
There
Amazon, right?
should be. What a great idea. I would do it if I wasn't so lazy.
Would ride your bike around throwing books at people?
Yeah, just go around book club where you just get a random book, like maybe a secondhand book. I like those, and just like throw them at people through
Here,
the window. Maybe that's not such a good idea. I
I
don't
don't
know.
know. It sounds radical. Sounds cool.
Sometimes being radical is not so bad. Just
Yeah.
depends.
Yeah. Yeah. See, you're always waffling. You can see the
I am. I'm
different
a waffler.
sides,
Somebody
right?
did an impression of me yesterday,
Oh
and
no.
it was a waffling impression.
Oh no.
Because I'm always trying to like, well, on the other hand, this, but this, and really both are not so bad, but those are bad. So I know I do this, but it's also true to what I think. So
Hmm. Well, thanks for joining me. I'm
thank
gonna
you so
wrap
much
up.
for having me. Always great to have a conversation with you.
Absolutely. Dope. Cool.